The battle lines are drawn, but who will win? 4 cabinet ministers are facing down the Chancellor, asking for more money for their departments ahead of next week's spending review. But how will the chips fall, and who will end up paying the bill? My name's Tom Harwood, and this is GBN Originals. Well, it's crunch time at the Treasury. Not a full budget, but a fiscal update, a spending review, setting the spending envelopes for every government department. Not for the next year, not for the next 2 years, but for the next 3 years. The government says that these 3-year spending envelopes will provide certainty to various government departments. But this new approach has also got some drawbacks, and that is the scramble for cash. Yes, everyone from Angela Rayner to Ed Miliband, even Yvette Cooper, holding out on settling their departmental budgets with the Chancellor ahead of this spending review on Wednesday. But why? Why are they waiting for the very last possible minute before that arrangement can be reached? Well, frankly, the answer's simple. They believe they can get more money. But the Chancellor isn't giving them more money fairly freely, because there's so much else to balance. We know that the winter fuel payment U-turn will likely be announced in full a week on Wednesday at this spending review. But we don't yet know how generous the U-turn on the winter fuel payments will be. The Liberal Democrats and the Reform Party say that if they were elected into government, they would reverse the cuts in full. But so far, we've not yet heard from the government what they actually believe they want to do with the U-turn. They say they want to make sure that more pensioners are eligible for the winter fuel payment, but we don't know where that threshold will fall. Will it be that a small number of extra pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments in time for this winter? Or will it be a larger number in time for this winter? Or a larger number not in time for this winter? I mean, the decisions, and indeed the speed at which these decisions can be implemented, giving sometimes the complexity of a means testing scheme, these can often be difficult. Of course, the reason why the threshold was chosen as it is, below £12,000 a year of income, in order to for pensioners to receive the winter fuel payment under the current system, the reason that threshold was chosen is that that's the threshold for pension credit. It's an already existing system that the Chancellor could sort of latch onto to provide an easy sense of means testing. But there isn't an immediately obvious other already existing system for the Chancellor to latch onto to deliver a higher threshold. How will she choose which pensioners get the extra payments and which don't? This has huge implications for the amount of money that will be spent on the scheme, because sometimes means testing can be expensing to deliver in and of itself, and that's before we get to the more than £1 billion cost of that winter fuel payment itself. And that's just one decision that the Chancellor has to make, because there are huge expectations that further money going to the defence budget will be demanded. Of course, there's already money allocated to get that defence budget up to 2.5% of GDP. That's reallocation of money mostly from the foreign aid budget to defence. But now there are demands from NATO itself that this 2.5% is simply not sufficient, that on defence 3% or even 3.5% of GDP must be spent in order to keep this country safe, in order to, frankly, rearm in a more dangerous world. And yet, here's one of the biggest problems for the Chancellor. She says that higher growth is the way that we can deliver greater spending. And that's absolutely true. Of course, if there's more growth in an economy, a Chancellor has an easier job. There's more money to play with without having to cut departments or reach for those nasty extra taxes. But when it comes to a percentage of GDP being spent on a department, like defence, when you have a target that a percentage of that GDP is spent, if that GDP grows, well then also that percentage of GDP grows commensurately. So it's difficult for the Chancellor, well frankly it's mathematically impossible for the Chancellor to fund an increase of the percentage of GDP spent on defence simply by hoping that GDP itself grows, because that percentage would grow at the same time. So where does the Chancellor find this money? Is she going to raise more in tax, Or is she going to cut more in some departments? There were some rumours that the Prime Minister was mulling over abolishing completely the culture department and rolling the things under culture into other departments. Some very important elements of digital regulation, some very important sectors for this country, particularly when it comes to the film industry. But the question is, do we need a Secretary of State for that? Could there be savings made by abolishing that department? It's something that Liz Truss mulled over when she was standing to be Prime Minister. Of course, the 49 days of her premiership didn't quite have time to abolish any department, but clearly that is something that the government has in previous months been thinking about. Is it going to happen in this spending review? Almost certainly not, but it's worthwhile looking at those longer term aims and discussions that are going on at the top of government. But let's zoom out and back to these 4 departments that have not yet settled their spending envelopes, because there is a huge amount of consternation in the direction of this government. There are people on the left of the Labour Party, people like Ed Miliband, who's the Net Zero Secretary, or Angela Rayner, the Local Government, Housing and Communities Secretary, who are seen as being on the left of the party. Ed Miliband, a former leader himself, Angela Rayner, someone that people tip to be considering the leadership herself. Certainly a lot of rumours have been circulating that Angela Rayner may have been behind some leaks from notes sent to the Chancellor in past months. Angela Rayner, according to these leaks, was suggesting which taxes could rise to fund more public spending and potentially avoid some of the cuts that we're going to see in the welfare department. So could it be that Angela Rayner is taking those arguments to the Chancellor yet another time, arguing that taxes must rise to pay for higher government spending than the Chancellor would want to see normally? This left-right tug of war over spending is certainly taking place at the top of government. And because the Chancellor has had to U-turn on this winter fuel universal payment means testing idea, the idea that the winter fuel payments must be restored to potentially millions of pensioners, because the Chancellor has had to back down on that issue, she is weakened politically. The Chancellor has fewer places to look than before and potentially less backing from number 10 than she did before. There is nothing so wounded as a wounded politician. When someone makes a U-turn, many others around that cabinet table smell blood. And clearly that's what happened with these 4 cabinet ministers, searching for where they can squeeze out more money from the Chancellor. A wounded Chancellor, a Chancellor who has had to face down the reality of the focus groups, the reality of the polling, and U-turn on one of the signature initial policy decisions that she made. That leads her to be a weakened political figure, and clearly that leads other cabinet ministers looking for where they can squeeze more money. But that comes to the heart of this all. Money. This is GBN money after all, because ultimately the money that the government spends is not the government's money. It's your money. It's my money. It's the money that they take from the people of this country through tax. And there are going to be lots of different areas where the Chancellor will be looking to see if she can squeeze more tax out of already a highly taxed population. The tax burden has not been higher for more than 70 years, and yet, by all estimations, it will be going up over the next fiscal period rather than down. And that may well not come through the headline measures that the Chancellor sort of ruled out in the manifesto, of course. Remember, they said they would not raise the headline rate of income tax, of national insurance on employees, or of VAT. But there are other things that they could do that fit with those manifesto commitments. For example, the government could lower the rate of VAT, but apply it to many more items. Currently, there are lots of items that are VAT exempt. Could the government apply VAT to those items and potentially reduce the rate, selling it as a VAT cut, but in reality applying that value-added tax to many more things in this economy? Well, that is one potential route. There are other simplifications of the tax system that have been suggested to the Chancellor. There are several peculiarities and tax traps, but also there is the thorny issue of how wealth is taxed in this country. There are huge inequalities in how council tax is levied. If you live in a multi-million pound mansion in Chelsea, you're going to pay less tax as a proportion than you would if you lived in a two-bed semi in Doncaster. Is that a fair system? Well, many would argue no, but also a reorganisation is politically fraught. And does the Chancellor, or indeed the Prime Minister, have the political leverage to do a huge reorganisation and reassessment of where those council tax bands stay? Because of course they're frozen in the early 90s as things stand. So many decisions for the Chancellor to make, much tug of war to take place at the top of government, and cabinet ministers who simply are not backing down over winning more money for their departments. But remember this, whenever a cabinet minister wins more money from the Chancellor, from the Treasury for their own department, that's in reality them winning more money from your pocket to theirs. Well, we'll keep an eye on this spending review. It's due a week on Wednesday. It will be a fascinating time to watch the Chancellor and see how much money is accorded to each various department. Who amongst the cabinet will be the winners and who will be the losers? Those four holdouts, let's remember: Ed Miliband, Angela Rayner, Bridget Phillipson and Yvette Cooper. Those are the people who are holding out the latest. Let's see if their settlements are indeed the most generous. We'll keep a close eye on it here at GBN Money. And in the meantime, remember to subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest of the financial trials and tribulations of this precarious government.